Hello, I'm Trevor Herman. I'm a counselor in Asheville, North Carolina. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I make these videos primarily for current and prospective clients to learn new skills, to practice skills we've tried in therapy, or to gain new information or refresh information about mental health and wellness and resilience. If you're not a client, not interested in being a client, please enjoy the videos as well. They can be helpful for just about anyone. If you are in a mental health emergency, please stop watching the video and call 911. Please don't try to contact me in the event of an emergency. I hope that you enjoy the videos, get something out of them, and if you want to subscribe to my channel, that's great. If you enjoy the video, please hit like. That's helpful to me. And enjoy. Welcome back. I'm Trevor Herman. Today we're going to talk some about diagnosis and how it can directly impact clients, either beneficially or potentially negatively. Diagnosis has a lot of purposes that we won't address today. It serves many functions, including, justifying insurance payouts and informing how medications are prescribed or not. But those are kind of in the background from a client perspective. And so for a client, diagnosis is this kind of mysterious thing that a clinician talks about after asking a bunch of intrusive questions. And it can be really intimidating to a client to hear this potentially bizarre sounding name attached to what they've been living. So I'd like to talk today about how diagnosis could be a stigmatizing, painful, and potentially traumatic experience for a client versus how it could be an empowering and informative experience for a client. So I think it's helpful if we use an example that's similar to many clients that have come to see me over the years. And so if a client comes in and he starts talking about he's just really struggled for a long time feeling stable, it seems like he's needing to get a new job every 6 months because when he starts a job, he's like the star employee. He's working more than anyone else and longer than anyone else and taking on new tasks and being proactive. But over time, he gets worn out and he starts to notice that other people aren't working as hard, and he starts to resent that. Over time, he might get in conflicts with his peers or even his managers, and so then it's time to find a different job. And he describes that this pattern also reaches into his personal relationships, that he'll meet someone and they'll be friends immediately, like want to hang out all the time. And then over time, something happens and all of a sudden it's like, I don't want to be around that person at all. And that this also stretches into romantic relationships, that he'll meet a prospective new partner and wow, it's like the best thing in the world, and they spend so much time together. And then it seems like something just flips, and all of a sudden it's like, I can't stand being around you. And that this all impacts his daily experience of being healthy or not, that he oftentimes questions his own thoughts and whether they're valid or real. And that doubt and anxiety can be overwhelming, and that when he feels that other people are treating him poorly, he gets so angry that he feels like he might explode and actually do something harmful, which he hasn't, but he feels that way. And that sometimes his emotions are so intense that he just needs to get them out somehow. And so he's, at times, burned himself with cigarettes. It's been a little while, but he's done that. Okay, and he's been in recovery for several years, but when he was younger, he used to drink heavily, trying to drown out some of the feelings and thoughts that were so negative inside. And when asked about his upbringing, he described loving parents, but also just not feeling connected to them in a really strong way. That maybe his feelings, even though they tried, that his feelings were invalidated consistently, that his needs weren't being met emotionally. So in having this conversation and just fleshing out this history with this client, he discloses that he's been called crazy for years and broken, and that he's internalized that he thinks of himself as broken. And so we just have a conversation about what that's been like and how he came to be here. and just start talking about ideas, and bring up the idea of, hey, have you ever learned anything about what's called borderline personality disorder? Let them know that maybe the name isn't very appealing, but let's just talk about the symptoms that usually go with it and the signs that are observable to others that go with it. And he hears about these symptoms and signs, and all of a sudden he says, yeah, that's me. That's me. I've been living that. I had no idea that was just a thing. I thought I was crazy. And so we talk about what it means to live with borderline personality disorder, and that there are treatments available, that sometimes medications can be helpful along with counseling and go into group and meeting with a peer support specialist, and that people really do get better. Actually, they get better more from BPD than they may from bipolar disorder or depression, things that actually oftentimes have less stigma attached to them. And in hearing all of this, the client's affect appearance just changes. He went from looking defeated to looking engaged and curious and a little bit hopeful. And he starts asking, are there online support groups for people living with BPD? I'm like, yeah, I don't know of one I'd recommend, but you can search for them. And he starts getting encouraged that he's not the only person living with this, that he's not alone, that he's not broken. In fact, that he has really good prospects for getting better over time. And so in this version of arriving at a diagnosis, it's very collaborative. There's some teaching that went on. There's curiosity from the clinician's point of view. There's a back and forth conversation. And the client walks away with relief. Wow, this is real. This isn't just made up. It's not all in my head. I'm not crazy, and I'm not broken. I may not like the name borderline personality disorder, but at least it's a name of some sort attached to what's happening inside of me. And so that client may leave feeling really empowered, having learned about borderline personality disorder. Another version is, I've seen many clients that have seen other providers previously, and I'll hopefully have time to go through the records that were sent or the records that I may have access to, whether it's from a hospital discharge or whatever it is. And I'll read pretty carefully because I don't want the client to feel like their time has been wasted. They know that records have followed them, so I try to read them. And I'll ask them about the things they've been diagnosed with in the past. And so let's say I've read through the records and here's a client in front of me. And I ask her about, hey, I'm noticing in these records from this other provider that they had diagnosed you with borderline personality disorder. And she says, what is that? And it turns out that she had been diagnosed with it some time ago, but the provider had not talked to her about it, that it had simply been in her paperwork that had followed her electronically. And she had never heard that before. And so now I'm in this position as a provider of like, hey, let's just explore this together. But backtracking from her point of view and her feeling like she had been labeled with something that doesn't sound great by someone who didn't take the time or effort to talk it over with her. And she doesn't feel supported by this. She feels labeled and stigmatized and less than in this situation. And now it's my task as the clinician to see if we can address that damage and move on from here. But it is damage, and it's worth acknowledging that a lot of clients have had that experience of diagnosis, even if it's not quite that extreme. That a diagnosis was assigned without a whole lot of collaboration and discussion, and that can be really damaging. Even if it's not traumatizing, it just doesn't feel good. And so there is a lot more to diagnosis from a client perspective than just that. But that's a big piece. It really can be empowering. It can be this thing that leads you to owning what's been happening inside. Or it can be this thing that makes getting help even more off-putting. And so my hope is that if a client is watching this, they'll understand that they do have the option to arrive at a diagnosis if it's needed, in a way that feels like they had a role in it. And feels like they have information to provide and ownership of it so that it's actually helpful, versus it just being something that gets stamped on their record and follows them around electronically forever, which doesn't feel so great. So I hope this is helpful as a little primer in what diagnosis can be from a client perspective in a helpful way. Thank you.